big thing about Apple's AI is that it is a private AI cloud, or at least that's what they're billing it as. Very similar to Microsoft's Copilot as well. And the advantage to this is that you can build your own language model using company documents, proprietary information, privileged information that wouldn't be available on the web to have been sampled from an LLM. But you also have the ability to include, in Copilot's case at least, the ability to put financial information and do analysis and so forth. We're not entirely sure what we're going to get from Apple's AI at this point in time. Their presentation at the keynote was flashy, as you would expect from an Apple keynote. It showed a lot of consumer-grade things, categorizing photos and auto-completion and, improvements to Siri, which, let's face it, anything's an improvement to Siri at this point. But we didn't really see any commercial or enterprise applications demonstrated or even really talked about that had any significant promise. So the jury's still out on how this is going to affect enterprise data security. But the one thing that should be worth mentioning is that if any company has proven themselves as backing their promise for privacy, it's been Apple lately. So if you're going to trust your information to anybody, Apple might be the people that you want to. The other thing this speaks to is the role of bug bounties in enhancing enterprise cloud security. Apple's putting up over $1 million at this point in time for their bug bounty program, which says a lot because Apple's a notoriously closed company, a notoriously closed system they're highly protective of their intellectual property, of who has access to that if you're not a member of the staff of the company. And they've generally been exceedingly miserly when it comes to granting access to these types of things. The fact that they're taking the step now to offer up the bug bounties, especially for something as new and cutting edge as their AI, is a good sign that Apple's kind of, gotten to the point where they accept what the rest of the industry is doing at this point in time to try to improve security. So what does Apple's private cloud compute actually mean for enterprise and artificial intelligence moving forward? Well, it's been marketed as a solution that could handle intensive AI tasks while ensuring privacy. Now, a good chunk of what that processing is done is actually done on the local side now. Even in my experience, I have found that machines that are running Apple Silicon, and I'm not talking iPhones, I'm talking, in my experience, MacBook Pros running M2s. I've got it running on an Apple Studio at work on an M1, I think it's an M1 Pro, it's not an Ultra. But the processors themselves are exceedingly efficient at running AI. Now, when you couple this with a cloud-based AI, adding additional processing power and additional data storage plus private data storage, you're looking at a pretty robust system, I think. So I think right now, my company, for instance, is evaluating a couple of different AI options, Copilot being one, OpenGPT being another. So there's a number of options out there, and I think Apple immediately gets a place at the table with their release, even though they're very late in the game releasing it. Apple's been gearing up their hardware for handling this type of processing with their neural engines and so forth for several generations of processors now. So they've had the horsepower to do it. They just haven't released the actual solutions for it. So the other option, the other piece of useful information here is Apple's privacy-first approach to enterprise computing and compliance and data protection. This obviously all started at the consumer level. Apple is exceedingly protective to the point of not wanting to be the gatekeeper, right? So we have encrypted iPhones, encrypted laptops, encrypted hard drives, and so forth, where most companies want to be the holders to those keys because that's vital information that they can then use, manipulate, disseminate, or even just analyze for predictive trends. Apple's always been very hands-off. So I think when you bring that approach from the computing world to the AI world, where privacy is even more of a concern given the amount of exfiltration of information that's out there, Apple has a very good chance of kind of setting that standard and raising that bar for all of the AI components and providers out there moving forward. And finally, I think the last significant thing that this article kind of demonstrates is the need for enterprise collaboration with security researchers. We've been beaten to the ground numerous times by the DMCA and the restrictions placed on what researchers can legally do with the equipment, the hardware, the software that they have at their disposal. And when you have companies like Microsoft and Apple who run closed systems, there's obviously a move towards open source, but traditionally these have been very closed entities that you have to trust, right? So you're going to run Microsoft as your operating system in your enterprise. You don't know. It's never, you don't get an external audit of that. You don't get an independent audit of that. You look at Patch Tuesdays and you see that Microsoft is consistently releasing 70, 80, 90 patches a month. You can't help but wonder if they open that up to security researchers to go in and do the work for them under the guise of a bug bounty program like Apple is doing here, you can't help but improve the product, improve the service, improve the reputation. And I think Apple at least has finally bought into this philosophy here of let's have other people break our stuff for us, and they'll break it in ways that we haven't thought about breaking it. And the more exposure that your product has to the more people, more obviously hardware, configuration, networks, when you can put forth a much broader effort at testing where budgets or time or staff, lack of staff may, now, mind you, Apple is not short on resources to pay for these types of things. But a lot of times your developers and your testers that are in-house are too close to it. They're too close to the product. They're too close to the process. And there may be internal pressures, bureaucracies, and stresses that they run into where they can't do as good a job as someone who doesn't have a horse in the race. Where you can have a slew of outside outside testers come in and objectively poke a stick at your product and tell you how to make it better. Microsoft has kind of done it, but it's largely an open source community type of thing that has proven to be highly effective. So hopefully this signifies a change in trend for Apple and other enterprise manufacturers like that. Our next story comes to us from TechCrunch. Again, this one is Deepfake Danger Exposes Corporate Vulnerabilities. In a striking revelation at TechCrunch Disrupt in San Francisco, Asaf Rappaport, CEO and co-founder of cybersecurity firm Wiz, shared that his company was recently targeted by a sophisticated deepfake attack. Several employees received a voice message purportedly from Rappaport attempting to steal their credentials. The team quickly realized something was amiss as the voice, generated from a public conference recording, didn't match the CEO's usual tone, tipping them off to an attack. While the company could trace the origin of the deepfake, the perpetrators remain unknown. Rappaport pointed out the low risk of being caught makes cyber attacks particularly attractive for criminals. He also discussed Wiz's decision to reject a $23 billion acquisition offer from Google, citing the massive $100 billion potential in the cloud security market. Now, we're not going to talk to the possible merger that they had turned down here, but I think what's important to take away from this is the increase in the number of instances of deepfakes, how those deepfakes are being used even on security conscious companies like this. So deepfake technology, once associated primarily with entertainment or political disinformation, is now making its way into enterprise cyber attacks. There was an incident earlier this year with, I want to say it's an Australian company, where they had been victims of a financial scam when a deep fake was used to convince one of their financial employees to wire transfers to an unknown account. And the deep fake itself actually created a video conference with the entire executive team that was totally fiction. None of them existed, but it looked like them, it sounded like them, so the individual was convinced that it was legitimate. So the level of sophistication that we're seeing here, combined with the probably oldest method of infiltration, but one of the most effective in social engineering, these two things combined have proven to be a lethal combination at this point in time. One of the things that you can do to combat this is one that's pushed from several different security frameworks right now, and it is one that the federal government preaches quite frequently, and that's insider awareness. But in this case here, it has to go a step further. It's not just awareness, but you have to be able to notice behavioral anomalies, and that has to become a defense. In this case here, they know that the CEO himself is admittedly not a good public speaker, and they're all familiar with how he speaks in public. So the advantage that they had in this case here was they happened to use a public speech that he made and realized that it was a very different tone than his internal communications. So that was one of the things that helped them here. But employees have to be trained now to look at these types of things, to understand when someone is or may not be a legitimate representation of themselves. And it requires probably new technology that can do deepfake detection. And there's a number of options that are out there now. But as with most things in cybersecurity, it's a cat and mouse game. And I think the bad guys are kind of winning right now until the technology catches up with them. Until then, there's obviously different things that we can do. You could have certain key phrases that are published on a daily or weekly basis that if those key phrases don't make it into the conversation, and obviously you keep them secret, but if they don't make it into the conversation, then you know that it's not a legitimate conversation. It's an old spycraft technique that you would have safe words. You would start off a message with a certain phrase in front of it, or you would have to include a certain phrase somewhere in the message itself. And this is going back, 17, 1800s, old school type of espionage tools. The other thing that this brings up is the issue of remote work and secure communication. There have been numerous instances of remote workers, and I think the most recent one that I saw was from North Korea, where remote workers are pretending to be from other countries, getting jobs in companies with sensitive information, and then immediately exfiltrating that information back to North Korea. So there has to be some protocols in place, some mechanisms in place to ensure that your remote workers aren't deep faking you like this. The other issue, which, Rappaport points out, is these are relatively low risk crimes. There are high incidence of occurrence. There's low incidence of detection and capture, especially when you can pull off one of these from another country. I mean, there's nothing you can do to enforce a deep fake that's emerging from an adversarial country like North Korea or Iran or Russia or what have you. Sure, you can trace IP, you can see where it's coming from, but VPNs can get around that these days. The only thing you might have is some of this old school spycraft that you can use that ensures that the communications themselves are secure. You can't obviously trust encryption anymore because encryption's ubiquitous at this point in time. Everybody has it everywhere. In fact, you're more suspicious if you don't have encryption at this point in time. So I think what you're going to see is you're going to see new techniques, new security validation techniques. If I'm having a conference call, somewhere in that conference call, I have to show an emblem or a pin or a certain color or something along those lines that only the employees should be aware of. And that information should have been relayed to them out of bandwidth using some other communication method, maybe on a rotational basis or something like that. But we're obviously going to have to take up new techniques to get around some of these more convincing deepfakes that we have. Our next article comes from Info Security Magazine. Let me switch my web page here. This one tells us how NIS2 is reshaping budgets, risk, and global business. The EU's Network and Information Security, NIS2 directive, is significantly impacting businesses, forcing many to divert resources from other crucial areas to ensure compliance. Research from Veeam reveals that 95% of applicable companies have reallocated funds, with over a third pulling from risk management budgets and others from recruitment and emergency reserves. This financial strain is exacerbated by shrinking or stagnant IT budgets amidst rising business costs and inflation. While 68% of firms report receiving extra budget for compliance, concerns remain that these adjustments could affect businesses' critical business functions. The directive, which came into force on October 17th, 2024, imposes strict penalties for non-compliance, including potential corporate liability, prompting organizations to prioritize compliance. Despite this, NIS2 ranks low on IT leaders' priority lists, falling behind concerns such as the skills gap and rising operational costs. The directive affects around 150,000 companies in the EU and beyond, including supply chain entities outside the EU, underscoring its far-reaching impact. Now, I think this is episode 6. I think 4 of the 6 episodes I've done so far have railed against these heavy-handed, unfunded government mandates. Normally, I'm railing against those that are imposed on U.S. companies by the federal government. But in this case here, our friends over in Europe are now entwined in this type of problem here. The concern with something like this is it's a carrot and stick approach without the carrot. So you're telling people that they have to be compliant with this or face penalties. And in order to meet that requirement, you're seeing significant budgetary sacrifices from other critical areas that, while it allows these companies to meet this new requirement, you're going to see other security things fall by the wayside. Budget cuts for security personnel, budget cuts for expansion and training, budget cuts for new technology. So by forcing really what is an arbitrary standard down the throats of the companies in your sphere of influence, we'll say, by doing that, you're forcing them to compromise elsewhere. And while there definitely needs to be standards, and those standards need to be enforced, and you need to have implications, penalties if they're not enforced, doing so without providing any kind of incentive, these companies, is dangerous. And I'm not talking cashback incentives necessarily. You could do this through tax incentives. You can do it through vouchers. You could do it through a percentage markup on contracts with the government. There's a lot of different ways that you can reward these companies. And by sidestepping that carrot approach and just going with the stick, you're going to force them into a compromising position, or you're not going to, but there's a high chance that you're going to force them into a compromising position where, in order to meet this standard, other initiatives that are already underway are going to suffer. So it's kind of a dangerous tightrope to walk here from a government standpoint. And the thing that's really difficult with this is that they're imposing it not just on EU-based companies, but they're also imposing this on companies that are outside the EU that do critical business with the EU. I could think of like a BAE or someone like that, where there's a lot of exchange of defense contracts and such, where you basically want to impose your standards on countries or companies in other countries that are not legally bound by it. But I think you're going to run into some problems with enforcement with that, as much as you're going to run into a problem with enforcing your penalties on corporate liability. We've already seen in the U.S. here where the requirements we have are prohibitively costly for a lot of those smaller businesses. And those smaller businesses are doing the absolute minimum to achieve those. Now, while they may achieve those absolute minimums, what are they sacrificing in the process? That's something that has to be taken into consideration. There are sacrifices that are being made. The other issue you run into is IT budgeting. I mean, IT is notoriously under budgeted no matter what. Given the rise of malicious software and cybersecurity attacks and all these standards, you would think your IT budgets would be growing to accommodate these, but most of them aren't. Most of them are shrinking. There's an overall philosophy with most upper management that's in a non-technical company that, IT is the redheaded stepchild. It always has been. It's a necessary evil because IT doesn't bring in revenue. When in reality, every piece of revenue that comes into a company can be traced directly back to their dependence on IT. And executives and C-suite directors and so forth need to understand that and need to make sure that there's budget not only for our existing programs, but for these additional mandates to come in so that we're not caught off guard. The one advantage we have with these mandates is the bureaucracy of government tends to grind slowly, regardless of where in the world it is. So when these mandates come out, it takes quite some time to implement them usually. Although I will say the European Union seems to rattle these off much faster than the federal government in the United States does. But that's a double-edged sword as well. So when these standards come out, it takes so long because of government bureaucracy that by the time they come out, they're most likely outdated already. And we're seeing that in the United States now. So then there's another push to then update those standards and then get everyone compliant with those standards. If you're a cybersecurity professional and you make money off of this, it's great news for you because it's recurring revenue and it's a job security for quite some time. But if you're a small to medium-sized business, this gets expensive very fast. And you have to be very careful with future planning and future proofing with this stuff, because if you do the minimum to get compliant now, you may have systems in place now that need to be pulled out and replaced in a few years before they should be end of life because you didn't have the budget to go the right way. So a lot of compromises to keep in mind here, but it's a classic example of probably government overreach here, but it's not happening in the United States this time. So that's good news for us, I guess, but sorry for the EU. You guys are having to put up with some of the stuff that we've been dealing with for some time now. So we're going to take a quick break, but before we do, I want to take a moment to thank our listening and viewing audience. If you don't subscribe already, I would invite you to do so. You can find us listed as Insights into Things. All of our programs, video and audio, are listed there. We're listed on Apple Podcast, Spotify, Google, iHeartRadio, TuneIn, pretty much anywhere you can get a podcast these days. I would also encourage you to give us your feedback. We'd love to hear what you have to say. We're always open to suggestions. Tell us what we're doing right, what we're doing wrong, what topics you'd like us to cover, anything you'd like us to deep dive into. You can email us at comments@insightsintothings.com. You can call and leave a voicemail for us at 856-403-8788. That's 856-403-8788. Leave a voicemail. Let us know what you think. If you'd like us to put your comments on the air or in a podcast, let us know which podcast you'd like to appear on. Keep in mind, we are a family-friendly network here, so keep that in mind. I would also recommend you check us out on Twitch. We do stream 5 days a week at twitch.tv/insightsintothings. If you are an Amazon Prime subscriber, you do get a free monthly Twitch subscription. If you threw that our way, we would be most appreciative. That helps us keep the lights on around here. You can get links to those and everything else on our main website at www.insightsintothings.com. We'll be right back.
Insights into Entertainment, a podcast series taking a deeper look into entertainment and media. Our husband and wife team of pop culture fanatics are exploring all things from music and movies to television and fandom. We'll look at the interesting and obscure entertainment news of the week. We'll talk about theme park and pop culture news. We'll give you the latest and greatest on pop culture conventions. We'll give you a deep dive into Disney, Star Wars, and much more. Check out our video episodes at youtube.com/insightsintothings. Our audio episodes at podcast.insightsintoentertainment.com, or check us out on the web at insightsintothings.com.
Welcome back to Insights into Technology. Our next story comes to us from The Record. Penn State's $1.25 million cybersecurity wake-up call. Penn State University has been fined $1.25 million for failing to comply with cybersecurity requirements in its contracts with the Department of Defense and NASA. The fine relates to 15 contracts where the university did not implement required cybersecurity controls between 2018 and 2023. Despite not acknowledging the issues, Penn State reportedly failed to take action to correct them, misleading the government about when it would address the deficiencies. The Justice Department's Civil Division emphasized the importance of cybersecurity in safeguarding sensitive government information, particularly in defense research and development. The settlement stems from a whistleblower lawsuit under the False Claims Act with Matthew Decker, Penn State's former chief information officer, receiving $250,000 as part of the resolution. While Penn State did not admit to the charges, it has since implemented additional cybersecurity measures. The case is part of the broader wow, this is a tough one. The case is part of the broader civil cyber fraud initiative launched in 2021 to hold organizations accountable for weak cybersecurity that puts federal data at risk. Similar lawsuits have targeted other institutions, such as Georgia Tech, for mishandling sensitive information. Now, I have to say, this is a subject that is near and dear to my heart. I have spent the last several months pouring through tons and tons. I think we're up to 70 to 80 pages of documentation now for our CMMC certification for my company. So the rules, regulations, and adherence to cybersecurity rules is quite close to my heart right now. This also signifies the high stakes of cybersecurity compliance for federal contractors. A large percentage of my company's business comes from federal contracts. And if you fail to be compliant with the respective requirements for your contracts, you just don't get the contracts at this point moving forward, which, as long as you play by the rules, you should be fine. And even if you don't play by the rules, if you don't want to or have the resources to go through the expense of getting your certifications, then just don't take the federal contracts and just do commercial work. Under most circumstances, that's usually not an issue, unless the majority of your work comes from government contracts. The one thing this also emphasizes is proactive versus reactive when it comes to cybersecurity strategies. Penn State's failure to take corrective actions after acknowledging cybersecurity deficiencies is a critical lesson for all businesses. Once you're caught on the carpet, you have to fix it. You shouldn't be to the point where you're that far out of compliance to begin with, if you're claiming compliance. But once you're called for being out of compliance, it's not just a convenience, right? They're not having you do this just for the fun of it or just to be a pain in the neck. Cybersecurity helps your business. It's not just there to protect federal data, federal information. It's there to protect you too. And given the number of ransomware attacks and network intrusions that we're seeing here, you would think that most companies would want to protect themselves from it. Cybersecurity preparation is no different than a burglar alarm system or a fire alarm system or insurance on your building. I mean, these are all things that you put in place in a traditional business to protect your business, and cybersecurity is no different. It's another layer of protection because everything is computerized, and as a result, that's another vector in which your company can be threatened. Now, this did come from a whistleblower lawsuit, and that whistleblower followed all the proper procedures to try to reach internal accountability. So there was a lot of, and I don't want to say, this is a pending court case, so I don't want to say that there's a lot of illegal intent here. I can't really speak to intent, but there was a deliberate effort to cover up the deficiencies once they were found. And given that, I have to conclude that there was probably malicious intent to portray compliance with these things. And we've even seen that in our industry, in my industry, where we engage in an external cybersecurity company to come in and help us get through our early phases of DFARS compliance. And it was expensive, I'm not going to lie. We spent a lot of money, a lot of time. We put a plan together. We were compliant, and that allowed us to get contracts. But at that time, it was all self-attestation. We audited ourselves. We determined whether or not we were compliant based on documentation. And there wasn't a need for a third-party audit. The industry is obviously moving away from that now to add some legitimacy to the claims. But back then, people couldn't afford to do the things that we did to be compliant, so they would just check the box. And nobody was checking on them. Nobody was following up on them. Nobody was looking for any level of compliance. And you had a boatload of smaller companies that were kind of checking that box and making claims that were not real, which is fraudulent. And nowadays, you can't do that. And this lawsuit is a great example of that. So our next story comes to us from the Associated Press. Whispering Errors: How AI Hallucinations Shake Trust in Healthcare Transcriptions. OpenAI's transcription tool Whisper, touted for its accuracy, has been found to produce fabricated content or hallucinations, according to multiple software engineers and researchers. These errors range from misinterpreted speech to dangerous inventions, such as violent language and non-existent medical treatments. Particularly concerning is Whisper's use in medical settings where accurate transcription of patient consultations is crucial. Hospitals and health systems have adopted the tool to reduce the burden of note-taking on medical providers, despite OpenAI's warnings against using Whisper in high-risk domains like healthcare. Experts are calling for stricter regulations on AI and better safeguards to prevent such hallucinations from causing harm, particularly in critical sectors. Moreover, the privacy concerns around Whisper's use of medical environments are escalating. Patients and lawmakers are wary of the potential misuse of sensitive consultation data, as seen when a California state lawmaker refused to sign a health network's form that allowed tech companies to access her child's doctor visit recordings. The lack of original audio recordings in some transcription systems further complicates the ability to verify the accuracy of these AI-generated transcripts, raising significant issues in both privacy and accuracy. And we've known for a long time now that AI reliability and accuracy is questionable, right? And this has to do a lot with the models, that we're using, as well as the prompt engineering that goes into building these, and any additional reference material that we provide. There's an inherent risk of inaccuracy anytime you're engaging in algorithmic outputs or consultations. Using these in a medical setting is really dangerous. I mean, you've got privacy implications to deal with. They're talking about Whisper because Whisper does real-time transcription, so you don't have a recording that you can then run through a transcription service, but still have the original recording. So you're trusting real-time transcription, the AI in this case, without having the ability to go back and verify it from a recording. This push for stricter AI regulations is kind of, it's one of those where it's needed. It probably will be needed, but we're nowhere near ready to start writing that type of regulation. AI itself is still really in its infancy. It hasn't really gained the foothold that it's probably going to gain. It hasn't reached its peak yet at this point in time, so it's still developing, and it's developing rapidly between hardware and software and the models. So there's a lot more development that has to go into this before it even stabilizes to something that's going to be what we recognize as the future of AI. So to try to regulate it at this point in time, I think is dangerous. The one thing you do need in a medical transcription service is trust. Now, this isn't just a AI concern. I years ago was seeing a cardiologist, and he would dictate all of his notes into a recorder, or actually into a computer, using at the time Dragon Dictate. And that would transpose everything for him, and then he would send his notes over to his staff to be added into users' files and so forth. Well, he would do this in his office that was between 3 exam rooms. And I guess he was not using the highest quality microphone because he was practically shouting these notes. So you could sit in one of the exam rooms and hear everything he said, which in and of itself is a security violation that has nothing to do with AI. So this idea of convenience over security is a constant struggle. I want to be able to just talk and something happens. I want instant gratification. Well, sometimes that doesn't work when you need to have security involved here. And AI is just the next step. It's that next tool of how they can get more convenience without having to worry about security. So that's kind of a scary thing that we're dealing with there. But with anything with AI nowadays, AI is questionable and needs to be verified. So if you don't have recordings, like for instance, when I record the podcast, I take the audio from this, I run it through the transcription services built into Adobe Premiere, and I get a transcription. I can then go back through that transcription, look at where it's at in the program itself, and see if the words are actually accurate. And until we have a much more reliable set of AI tools, I think that's the kind of verification process that needs to be in place. If you don't do that, you're really risking having dangerous things in your AI output. Our next story comes to us from The Record. Rebel Russians forking around with Linux. Russia has expressed strong opposition to the removal of several Russian maintainers from their Linux kernel, calling it, quote, an act of discrimination and signaling plans to develop its own independent Linux community. In response to these delistings, Russia's digital ministry announced intentions to collaborate with nations willing to engage in alternative open source development efforts. The move comes after the Linux community blocked 11 Russian maintainers, citing compliance with sanctions related to national security concerns. While the contributions of Russian developers to the Linux kernel are considered relatively minor, the decision has raised concerns about trust within the Linux developer community. Experts suggest that the removal could lead to the creation of Russian-led forks of the Linux kernel, potentially splintering the open source ecosystem. This follows broader trends of sanctions affecting Russian tech companies, including previous incidents involving Russian developers on platforms like GitHub. So we did run into a situation similar to this, or at least related to this, back when the most recent conflicts between Russia and the Ukraine happened, where there were at least one, possibly more shared libraries up on GitHub that were maintained by, I think it was a Ukrainian developer. And what that developer did was he maliciously modified the library to do an IP scan to see where the developer was who was using it. And if the IP originated from within Russia, it would do something nefarious. And I don't remember the details. But that seriously drew into question the reliability and the trustworthiness of having these shared libraries. And we're running into the same thing with Linux here. Russia's reaction to just about anything is isolation at this point. They've got their magic button that they can take themselves off the internet if it gets too inconvenient for them. They're trying to build their own internet themselves and with some of their other allies. So this next chapter of that isolation really isn't surprising at all. What's unfortunate is you could potentially have a significant impact on the global open source community. If every country starts siloing off all of its developers and networks and code and everything else, the internet ceases to be the internet. And you basically break the internet. I'm not sure that's the right way to go. I suspect what Russia's doing is more of a knee-jerk reaction than anything. But what this also does is it complicates software governance as well. If you're going to have multiple bodies of standards that dictate how software's written and governed and maintained and modified, then you're competing with political requirements and regional requirements and even ethnic requirements to a certain extent. And you're opening up a can of worms that just nothing good is going to come out of it. The role of sanctions and national security becomes an issue. The United States is really clamping down on a lot of international computing standards right now. There's this ridiculous push to ban TikTok. You've got this list of approved or unapproved vendors that are primarily Chinese that the federal government won't allow you to do business with those companies if you have federal contracts. And a lot of this, despite the fact, and McAfee's another example where they've banned McAfee in the country, the idea of politicizing computers and the internet and software is a dangerous thing. It really is. The internet itself is an excellent tool for anybody to use, regardless of where you are in the world regionally. But it's also a fantastic tool for collaboration and to bring people together. And you've got governments now that are trying to politicize it to the point that it becomes a political point in and of itself. And that's unfortunate. And we should not allow our elected leaders, well, and I say elected leaders in the United States, I'm pretty sure they're not really elected in Russia, but we shouldn't allow our political leadership to dictate technology policy that they don't understand. And frankly, they don't. You may have some people in the government that have some expertise, but they have very little concern about the future impact and development of technology when they can't get past their own politics. So we'll see. I don't think you're going to get a lot of buy-in from the world community for a Russian forked version of Linux. So if anything, it'll be probably a one-off, used, limited, but I don't think any of this bodes well for the technology community. So we're going to take our last break here, and when we come back, we're going to continue our discussion with Howard Dortch that we've had a couple segments with so far. We'll be right back.
Are you tired of your favorite gaming podcast finishing with a play?
Oh, no!
Well, check out No Credits Rolled, where we play the games but rarely finish them. How's it going, folks? I'm Sam Whalen, your friendly host at No Credits Rolled, the ultimate gaming podcast, where we dish out the latest scoops and reviews on all your beloved video games.
Hey, listen!
Not only that, but we spice things up with some guest interviews and even give you, yes, you, a chance to have your say. Tune in every other week for a fresh dose of No Credits Rolled, available on all major podcast platforms, and hit us up on social media at No Credits Rolled. So why wait? Let's dive into the gaming world together, where finishing games is optional, but the fun is guaranteed.
Welcome back to Insights into Technology. In part 3 of our interview with industry icon Howard Dortch, we dive deeper into some of the headline-grabbing topics in the technology world and get his insightful take on the future technology. So you're officially retired now, is that correct?
Absolutely.
How are you enjoying retirement?
I play video games. I stay away from the wife. Well, she has her TV shows that she likes to watch, Ghosts and Bigfoot and that kind of thing.
Sure.
And so she and I have an agreement that long about 7:30, 8 o'clock, she gets to watch all the crazy TV she wants, and I get to come play video games.
That sounds like a good deal. It sounds like a happy marriage there.
Yeah. Well, we spend a lot of time together, and, it's nice to get away from each other for a while. And she enjoys her time alone. I enjoy my time playing video games. And, we meet up later on and talk about our day.
Nice.
And she'll poke her head in every now and then to bring me coffee. And, are you fighting? Because if you're not fighting, I want to kiss, and she'll kiss me and leave the room. So
just to set the record straight, Howard and I know each other from actually our Star Wars Old Republic gaming group that we were together with. Unfortunately, I've stopped playing the game myself. I kind of lost interest in it. But you're still going strong in there, are you not?
Well, yeah, like I said, it's it's a couple hours of entertainment. I get to talk to some people. I log into Discord and tell jokes, have some fun. It's entertainment. I get tired of watching TV.
Yeah. Well, and you are quite the entertainer online too. You really you keep people laughing, so I have to give you props for that too.
I've had my moments.
So looking forward now, okay. So we've certainly established your credentials as being an expert in the industry, gaming and programming and everything else. What to you does the future of gaming look like? Because the technology now has jumped leaps and bounds. We're looking at now. We talked about the early days of Voodoo cards, which, by the way, 3DFX produced the Voodoo card.
3DFX, yep.
And they were actually a company that was put together by a couple of guys from Silicon Graphics that made the old toasters and all the video editing boxes. But nowadays, you go out and you look at what the latest video cards cost now. You're looking at $2,500 for a top-of-the-line video card, which is more than most people pay for an entire gaming system. Is it getting to the point where it's prohibitively expensive to continue this technology push for gaming?
Well, not really. Most game companies design to the lowest. I want to say the lowest available consumer market.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, the minimum is what the computer stores are selling. So if they can design to that level, if you want a greater experience, you can spend the money and get, you can see pimples on your character if you want,
Right.
But for people that just want to play a video game, the computers, the video cards, the monitors, you can use stuff that is just not top of the line and get a good experience. But some people, and this is like everybody in the world, you have a group of people that they want some entertainment and they will buy into it so far. And then you have another group of people that they absolutely have to have the biggest, bestest, fastest, greatest, bluest thing that there is, and they have the money to buy that. So the people, the hardware manufacturers, see that as they want more. They want more and more and more. So let's build more and more and more, because we're making a lot of money off of those upper end machines.
Right.
The bottom end machines, what they call the value machines. Like I'm probably playing on a value machine. It was top of the line 6-8 years ago, but now it's probably a $600-800 value machine.
Right.
But it plays Star Wars just fine.
Sure. Well, and in all fairness, Star Wars runs off of a fairly old game engine. They've done some updates. They finally brought it up to 64-bit and stuff like that, but it's not overly demanding.
No, the base is still DirectX 9.
Yeah.
I mean, they're going to, from what I hear, they're going to upgrade it to 11 or whatever. But the game itself, they're not even using. They're probably using 75% of DirectX's capabilities.
Mm-hmm.
DirectX can do a lot more than they're using the Hero engine, I think.
Hero, yeah.
For Star Wars.
Yeah.
So the Hero engine is not taking advantage of all that DirectX can do at this point. DirectX 9C. I know because I programmed it. not DirectX, but I do have code in it. But the capability of DirectX 9 is a lot greater than people give it credit for. 11, 12, 13 on up. What does it offer? It offers probably, like I said, you can see pimples on your character.
Yeah.
If that's a thing, okay. But it's speed. They brag about, I'm getting 100 frames a second. Well, why? Your eye can only discern 24.
Right.
30 frames a second. There, there's nothing wrong with 30 frames a second. 60 is better somehow, but 30 is good. I'm running 60.
And you get into like the DirectX 12 line, and some of the advancements they made in there was the direct memory access and stuff like that. So it's faster processing, not necessarily faster frames. So you'll get more pixels because they're trying to drive, back in the old days, you're driving 640 resolution monitors, then we're doing 1080, and now you're trying to drive 4K and 8K displays. There's a lot of computational power that has to go into driving that many pixels on screen at once. And then games like Star Wars and stuff, you get into depth of field and how many characters you can render and stuff like that. So there's a lot of optimizations from that, but you're right. I don't have to go out and spend $2,500 on a video game card, a GPU to do this type of stuff. I've always been the type of person. I'm one of those idiots who goes out and buys the top of the line stuff just so I can have the top of the line stuff, even though I may only use 50% of that processing power.
Well, and a lot of it comes down to the fact that you can.
True.
The economy has gotten to the point where, all right, what is top of the line, and what does that cost? What does it look like? Is $3,000 something that I'm willing to pay for? Not only would I use it for video games, but streaming Netflix or whatever. Is that something that's going to enhance that experience?
Right.
Possibly. So, and then people look at it like, I'm going to spend the $3,000 now, and that computer will be good for the next 6 or 8 years. I won't have to buy another computer for 6 or 8 years. Right.
The future proofing aspect of buying, comes into play there. I mean, the system that I'm doing this podcast on now was a gaming system that I had 8 years ago, I think now, and it's still going strong. And it's the first generation i9 processor in there, I future proofed it with all the systems that I tend to buy just so I don't have to keep going out and buying new systems every year.
Yeah, there's that. That's part of the environment. There's some people that just can't afford it, but really like to play. So they're going to be value market, and the companies are smart. I won't mention which ones, but they're smart enough to know. They figure out what the minimum computer is going to be to enjoyably run Final Fantasy or Star Wars or some of those games. And then what they'll do is they'll put it on sale.
Mm-hmm.
And, so the industry, the people that are making the hardware understand the industry. The people that are selling the hardware understand it. And consumers are, if I can spend $1,000 and play this game, I'll be real happy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So
you spent close to 10 years, just shy of 10 years, shaping the minds of the youth of today to be video game developers. What advice, and I ask this in general for the audience, but I also ask it personally because my daughter, she's a senior in high school now. She's actually going to be going to college next year. And she's shown an interest in wanting to do video game development. So she's looking at a couple places to do that kind of work at. What advice could you give to an aspiring developer or a video game designer that would be advice that they can take with them moving forward in their careers academically and professionally?
Well, there's like three parts to that. One part is the programming side. If you're comfortable with the programming and you like to do the software, Windows and DirectX or Apple, I think it's I can't remember the
Swift.
I wasn't. I don't do Apple much, so whatever the Apple version is, there's a technology out now. I can't remember, Volcano or something like Vulkan, I think, is trying to be a universal language. But if you get into the software part of it, learn to code C++. Learn the hard code. Everybody thinks that you can buy a game engine like Unity and just use Perl or Ruby or whatever fun code they use. Learn to actually program in C++. The second part of it is the artwork. For the artist, the biggest, hardest thing to do is textures. A texture artist is worth his weight in gold. You can build the models. The models are fairly easy. Here's a model, but trying to put the texture on the model and make the textures look realistic. So artwork is the other part of it. And the middle part, which is a really boring part, is learn to write. English. It's stories, English. You can't have a video game without a storyline.
Yeah.
You got to have a complete storyline. So the writers practice, make a movie. Give me the dialogue. Everybody is going to speak all the way through a movie or, a short movie. And you'll start seeing where you walk up to an NPC and the NPC asks you a question. You have to respond, somehow. And you get a quest and you have to go off and do it. And you come back and you talk to the NPC. Those words were designed by somebody.
Right.
You can't have a girl NPC standing there and talk like a man, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's
well, nowadays you probably could.
Yeah, well, but I was trying to think of a quick example of that, but the type of character, you got a troll, an ogre, a male, a female. So here are these different varieties of NPCs. You have to learn to actually write the conversations for all of them. And you got to have a story. You got to have the conversation within the story. So writing becomes a very important part of game design.
Mm-hmm.
Designing the code, the what we call the pixel pusher, to make the engine, show the characters, the artwork that you send over to the programmers to put in the game. But if there's no story, it's not a game.
Yeah. One of one of the games that I've been playing recently, and in fact, my entire family I've got into playing it, is Baldur's Gate 3. And you're right in that the story is really what drives everything. And for me, Baldur's Gate 3 has been amazing because it's the first game where, so there's 3 acts in Baldur's Gate 3, and you interact with characters recurringly in each act. And depending on how you interact with a character determines how you interact with them and how they interact with you later on. And I've done 14 playthroughs of the game now, the base story itself, and I've yet to experience the same thing on 14 playthroughs, which to me just blows my mind. It really does, that you could have that kind of sophistication and variety, almost like it's a real world involvement that you have, but it's so story driven. And you made a comment earlier that, you like to watch Netflix, but you play video games so you can have your own movie. And video games today literally are a movie that you're a part in. You're a character in that movie.
Yep. Well, and what you're talking about is basically an AI state machine.
Mm-hmm.
We knew how to do AI a long time ago. It's a big thing now. Everybody's saying, "Oh, AI is being released." We knew how to do it. It's no secret, no mystery.
Right.
We just didn't have the horsepower.
Yeah.
To do it to any length. You remember Radio Shack? I think the TRS-80 ELIZA program.
Yep.
Yeah, you talk to it, and it would talk back to you.
Yeah.
That was a basic, what they call a state-driven AI. And so where do you go from there? And I'm going to spoil all video games for you. Well, not all of them, but a lot of them. Take Star Wars, EverQuest, World of Warcraft, take any of them, all of them. You're with a group, you go into a dungeon, and there's a monster in there, and it takes 2 healers, 2 tanks, and 4 DPS, and the healers have to do this, and the tanks have to do that, and the off tank has to grab the ads. It's all fixed.
Mm-hmm.
Everything is fixed. If you do it that way, the puzzle, the what I call the choreography, if you do it just that way, you'll win the fight. If if your healer takes 1 step to the left and steps in something gooey and dies, up, you start over.
Right.
What we really wanted to do back then, and this is back then, what we really wanted to do is you go into the cave, and first time you go in the cave, the dragon's facing east. The second time you go into the cave, the dragon might be facing west or south or north. The ads may or may not come from the south, may or may not come from the east. The ads may be flying ads one time. Next time you go in, they're running dog things. So that's what we really wanted to do, because that would enhance the experience of the user.
Right.
The user could go in and say, I wonder what we're going to face this time. The boss could be a little bit stronger, a little bit weaker. The boss could understand your group makeup. These guys are all super players. Let's make it a little bit harder for them.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the intelligence that we wanted to put in. But we didn't have the horsepower or the time. Everybody is always pushed for a deadline for release on a game. they just don't have the time to add that little fluff in there
Right.
that I would really like to see in video games like Star Wars. It's when you go, I've gone through the dungeon so many times, I can almost do them all in my sleep.
Well, and it's funny you put it that way, because that's really what turned me off from playing Star Wars. Was I just got sick and tired of the grind. I got sick and tired of doing the same thing every time you go in and do this boss. Depending on the only thing that was different was the group that you went in with. So if you went in with a pug and you went in there with guys that you didn't know what they could do, they would make it interesting, and that was the only thing that really made going in and doing dungeons interesting, was what stupid thing the guy next to me was going to do. You know?
Yeah.
But the fights were all the same. As long as you knew how to do the dance moves and you knew where to step and when to step there, you could beat the fights. And to me, that lack of randomness just got too grinding to me.
Well, see, then you go into hard mode where it's the same fight, only harder.
Right. It's more steps and more health that you have to overcome. And
there's a big yellow thing appears where it didn't in easy mode.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, like I said, the game companies we need to get a product to market so that we can make money. I mean, that's their whole sole purpose in life, is to make money.
Yeah.
I haven't played Baldur's Gate, but from what you're saying, it sounds interesting. So in order to get this product put to market, my zone builders or my programmers, I can't have them wasting time on randomizing the encounters. They need to get this game put out and making me some money.
Yeah.
And that's the downfall of most of the video games nowadays. I would rather play a game. I'm totally happy with the graphics in Star Wars. I'm just happy as I can be. If they add that randomness to the game would change perspective completely. I would, they would just suck people back into it. If I could get a hold of the people at Broadsword and suggest that to them, I mean, I'm not busy. I could code it for them. It's not that hard, I mean,
well, and it's funny you go that route, and then you look at some of the games that try to put that effort in, and you look at games like Cyberpunk or Starfield when it first came out, and the games, even the previous rendition of Diablo. When they tried to do all that, when the games came out, because of that artificial deadline that was imposed on the developers, the games just weren't ready to be released when they were releasing, and they were just completely unplayable. And you wind up turning your user base off.
Yeah, and the big thing for the developers, the producers, are let's get it out there and we'll patch it.
Yep. Yeah.
Well, every time they patch it, they break something.
Mm-hmm.
And that happened in EverQuest. It happened in World of Warcraft. It happened in Star Wars. Remember Star Wars Galaxies?
Yep.
That was a really fun game, but there was no game.
Yeah.
There was no game.
It was a world, is basically you existed in a world.
Was a world. Yeah. I mean, you ran all the way, you fought your way these giant bugs all the way down to the bottom of some god-awful cavern. And at the bottom, there's a lockbox and no key.
Mm-hmm.
And the key doesn't exist anywhere in the world.
Right.
What's the point of going down to open the box if you have no key? So, it's in Lord of the Rings. I played most all of them, and same thing. They just didn't spend enough time on the slightest amount of AI.
Yeah.
State-driven AI would be, randomized state-driven AI would be a great thing. And for games like this, it would be the future. People would just love it. The boss isn't there right now. He comes running out of a cave. Oh my God, this is all different. You got to see this, it's excitement. So that's where it should go.
Yeah. Well, and to their credit, the later, a couple of the later games of Lord of the Rings, and I can't remember the I'm trying to look it up now, the actual game titles. They had some AI in there in that you would build a relationship with the lesser bosses. So you'd encounter these lesser bosses, and depending on how you interacted with them, you'd wind up on really a hierarchy chart of how they respond to you. So when you encounter them later in the game, they remembered, oh, this guy poked my eye out, or this guy ran away so I can get him, stuff like that. So you had a little bit more intelligence in there, but it was never really enough to give it that realism that you're looking for.
Yeah, I can't remember the exact term, but it's weighing. You add a weight to an encounter.
Right.
You add a negative weight. Let's say you have a number from 0 to 100. All right, you start off at 50, you're neutral, and you go in and slap somebody in the face. Well, you've pissed them off, so now your level is 60.
Mm-hmm.
So that's adding a weight to the next time you come in with the encounter. That person is going to say, well, I don't like you 60's worth, not 50's worth, but now I don't like you 60 or 70's worth.
Right.
And like I said, that's the part of, how are we going to code that? And if we just spend a little time coding things just that way, most of the games would take on a whole new life.
Yeah.
But we don't have time because we got to push it out the door.
Yeah. And it's not just the software industry. It's any not just, the gaming industry, but any software industry, you tend to wind up with artificial deadlines that force you to kick it out the door before it's ready to go. And sometimes you run into situations. Right. And the problem is that nowadays, because of vulnerabilities and exploits, patching it after it's out the door oftentimes is more dangerous than just waiting the extra couple of months to do it right the first time.
Yeah, I agree.
So that's all we had for this week, folks. Before we do go, I want to take a moment once again to thank all of our listening and viewing audience. And again, if you do not currently subscribe, I invite you to do so. If you subscribe to Insights into Things, you can get all of our video and audio podcasts for all of our shows. And you can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google, iHeartRadio, pretty much anywhere you can get a podcast. Check us out on Twitch. We stream 5 days a week at twitch.tv/insightsintothings. You can find us on Facebook at facebook.com/insightsintothingspodcast. High-res versions of all of our videos can be found on YouTube at youtube.com/insightsintothings. We'd love to hear from you. Reach out, give us your feedback. You can email us at comments@insightsintothings.com. Or give us a call and leave a voicemail for us. We'll get you on the air if you'd like. You can call us at 856-403-8788. That's 856-403-8788. Or you can get links to all this and more on our official website at www.insightsintothings.com. That's it. Another one in the books.
Insightful podcasts by informative hosts. Insights into Things, a podcast network. Welcome to Insights into Technology, a podcast exploring the latest in computers, networking, home automation, mobile computing, and all things technology related. Our hosts will take a deeper dive into the latest and greatest in tech trends and give you the information you need to enable your tech-centric world.
This is Insights into Technology, Episode 5. Actions Have Consequences. I'm your host, Joseph Whalen, and this is the tech news for this week. First up, we have an article from The Record. Proposed rules ban U.S. companies from selling sensitive data. The Biden administration has formally proposed new regulations that would restrict the sale and transfer of sensitive personal data, such as health, financial, and geolocation data, to 6 adversarial nations: China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, Cuba, and Venezuela. Executive Order 14117 is aimed at addressing severe national security risks posed by potential data breaches and cyber espionage. These rules aim to address national security risks by foreign actors exploiting bulk data to carry out cyber attacks and espionage. The new regulations set strict thresholds for data transactions and impose compliance requirements based on cybersecurity frameworks, with exemptions for certain telecommunications and clinical trial data. Though with congressional and presidential elections just weeks away, there's doubt as to whether there will be any forward movement on the bill this year. So this is another instance of what I popularly rail against: unfunded mandates by the government. Now, that's not to say that this isn't a necessary step in ensuring cybersecurity. However, there are implications in proposing this type of regulation that will have an impact on multiple industries that wind up being affected by this. The first thing that we have to worry about is the increased operational costs. In order to maintain these types of bans and to put the housekeeping tools in place that are needed in order to ensure that these regulations are actually adhered to, there's going to be a cost associated with that for infrastructure. This is also going to have an effect on global data flow. Right now, the internet doesn't have borders, despite the fact that Russia and China would like you to think that it does. So anytime that you're doing geo-blocking or everyone does geo-blocking for safety reasons. But anytime that you're proposing regulations like this in where you are basically restricting not even just certain countries, but certain types of data to certain countries, it has a negative impact. There are interconnectivity considerations that need to be worked out to make sure that we're not breaking systems in the process of this. Obviously, cybersecurity is at the forefront of the motivation for this, but there's a very good chance that when you impose these types of restrictions on organizations who are either not capable of adhering to them or don't have the resources to ensure that they're handled properly, you could cause an even worse situation from a cybersecurity standpoint. Now, there are significant risks to cyber espionage that we've seen already between just recently information leaking on Israel's planned retaliation against Iran for their attacks. But you get this a lot with industrial espionage, with Defense Department documents and drawings and information like that. So it's a definite concern, but it's another one of these kind of heavy-handed ways of the federal government trying to protect things in a knee-jerk reaction. The other problem that you run into is it's a couple of weeks before an election, and this is a Biden administration initiative. There's a good chance that a Harris administration would follow through with this, but it's not a guarantee. And chances are anything that Biden is doing here, if Trump comes back to office, he's not going to do any of this, which, at that point in time, we're kind of back to square one. So there's a lot that needs to wash out from this. The one, I guess, positive takeaway from this is the fact that the federal government is recognizing this information is leaking. The kind of inside joke here is that it's not just these adversarial countries that this information is leaking to. This information is leaking to data brokers like NPD. It's leaking to social media companies like Meta and X. So there's a lot of other layers in which the security of this information is being compromised. And the federal government only seems interested in looking at a very small subsector of where this information is being offloaded to. So a lot more work needs to be done. The next article that we have here comes to us from TechCrunch, and they tell us that the SEC is cracking down on misleading cybersecurity disclosures following the SolarWinds attack. The Securities and Exchange Commission has charged 4 companies for making misleading disclosures about the 2019 SolarWinds data breach. The affected companies, Checkpoint, Mimecast, Unisys, and Avaya, are facing penalties ranging from $990,000 to $4 million for downplaying the impact of the breaches. The SEC stated that these companies provided investors with insufficient information regarding the true scope of the cyber attacks. While all companies cooperated with the investigation, they neither admitted nor denied the SEC's findings. The violations varied among the companies, with Avaya failing to disclose the extent of data access, Checkpoint using vague descriptions of the breach, Mimecast minimizing the attack severity, and Unisys treating the breach as a hypothetical event. Sanjay Wada, acting director of the SEC's Division of Enforcement, emphasized the importance of transparency from companies affected by cyber attacks to protect shareholders and the public from further harm. So this is a significant issue. There are numerous cybersecurity frameworks that are in use in different parts of the world. The U.S. tends to adhere to NIST standards. Most of your European countries tend to adhere to ISO standards. But each of these frameworks has an incident response plan built into them. And that incident response plan basically dictates who you communicate, how you communicate, when you communicate, and how much you communicate. And they're pretty much all consistent across the board with some minor variations. And the frameworks only work when you adhere to these disclosure rules and the other rules that are obviously built into these frameworks. So when you have a situation where you have companies that are being breached in what turns out to be very public breaches, and they're clearly aware of what the notification process is. Because if they weren't aware of it, they wouldn't have skirted it the way that they did with, I wouldn't even say a delicate touch. I mean, they very deliberately avoided a public disclosure of factual information, which is almost conspiratorial in the way that it was handled. But what this does is it heightens the concern about the honesty that you're getting from these companies now. Anytime a company does have a breach, a lot of times if it's involving personally identifiable information, you typically don't hear about it until months or years later, after the fact, that after all that information is out the door already in the hands of nefarious evildoers, we'll say. And the consequence of that type of information is usually, monitoring of your credit report or whatever, which a year after the fact doesn't really help you all that much. So the ability to actually have this information in a timely manner and in an accurate manner so that the end users or the clients or customers or whoever's involved in the breach has the ability to do what they need to do to protect themselves is critical. And it's one of the fundamental aspects of these cybersecurity frameworks. The other problem that you run into is you're undermining your investor confidence and you're shirking your corporate responsibility. Now, in cases like this, there's legal ramifications. In other cases, it's reputational loss, or it could be a loss of revenue, or it could be taking a significant loss on the share price, which doesn't just impact the management of the company, it impacts all the investors. So there's a lot of secondary casualties that happen when we don't deal with these disclosures in a timely and factual manner. The other problem you run into is the people that are downstream from you have their own cybersecurity adherence that they have to comply with. And for my company, for instance, if one of my upstream vendors or suppliers has a breach, I need to be notified about it so I can obviously take the necessary steps to protect my organization, but also to protect the people that are downstream from me as well. And when this chain of communication is broken or distorted, as it was in this case here, you've now put all of those other entities at a higher risk of exposure and damage. So clearly there's legal responsibility that has to be looked at in this case here. And it also emphasizes the shift now towards cybersecurity governance and accountability. There's more outside pressure. There are numerous governing bodies that would police this type of thing, not the least of which is the federal government. And ultimately, what you're doing is you're jeopardizing your relationships with your vendors and your partners with this when you are not honest with it. And that's not even to say your own customers, because clearly you're violating the trust of your customers. But you have typically some type of arrangement in place already for reporting this type of thing to your vendors and your partners. And when you deliberately violate that trust, you're significantly jeopardizing their safety and that relationship. So while it's not surprising to see the federal government stepping in to handle this type of thing, what's really disturbing and disappointing on numerous levels is that you have companies that are deliberately trying to manipulate the information that's released in a way that doesn't make them look bad, which ultimately that truth is going to come out and make them look even worse. So they gain nothing from the misdirection. Next up is an article from CNN. This one is again, social media back in the headlines again. X users' data is now fueling AI and what you need to know. X's newly unveiled terms of service, set to take effect on November 15th, has sparked controversy by allowing the platform to use user-generated content to train its artificial intelligence models. This includes a wide range of content posted on X, from tweets to personal photos, raising concerns among artists and creators who fear their work could be used to power AI that may replace human creativity. Additionally, users are worried about the use of their personal information in AI training, and justifiably so. X's update also specifies that any legal disputes will be handled in courts located in Tarrant County, Texas, a venue favored by conservative activists, further fueling concerns about user rights. With similar data sharing practices exist across many social platforms, X's terms uniquely remove ambiguity by clearly stating that the user content can be used for AI development. Prior to this change, users could opt out of sharing their data for AI purposes, but it's unclear whether that option will remain available under the new terms. So, on one hand, you can give X credit for being transparent about their intentions, which gives all the users the option at that point in time to opt out of using that service, which officially I have personally. And the podcast has distanced itself from X at this point in time and probably will be removing itself from X in conjunction with this and recent changes to blocking rules that they've implemented. So the problem that you're running into here, and there's a lot of different problems, obviously, but we talk about data governance challenges for businesses. A lot of businesses use X for marketing and self-promotion and stuff and so forth. A lot of companies also use it to communicate in a timely and open way to their customers to get messaging out. I know not that long ago, we had some storms blow through here. We lost power, and the local power company was communicating. At the time, it was Twitter before it became X. But they were communicating real-time updates through that, which was very helpful to the users. The problem that you run into with the possibility, almost a guarantee, that your information is going to be used for AI processing is if you put proprietary information out there, that proprietary information is now being gobbled up for AI and large language models and becomes a data governance issue and a security issue, which ultimately can lead to legal risks if you have information out there that's being ingested into an AI that can then either be manipulated or regurgitated in manners that your company is not prepared for. Let's not even talk about the ethical implications of misusing users' data here without their permission. If they remove the opt-out ability, they're basically hijacking your information, your personal data, and your communications and posts and preferences and usage data, which makes it very difficult to maintain corporate compliance when you've got companies' data that's out there now that's going to be used for this as well. This is a good example of why people tend to be so concerned about AI and AI governance because data is money. And I think everyone understands at this point in time, if you're not paying for a service, you are the business model of that service. So your data, your habits, where you visit it, scrubbing the cookies out of your browser, all these things are all information that can now be ingested into this AI. And your information is now being used in ways that you don't want it to be used. So they're going to run down a very slippery slope here if they remove the opt-out ability, or at least make it more ambiguous than it is at this point in time. And I think you're seriously going to jeopardize the role of your users who are businesses as well. I don't think businesses can afford to operate in an environment where their data is not being respected and their data wishes are not being respected. So I think this is going to have a negative impact on X, but it's kind of been run into the ground since Musk has taken over anyway. So this really doesn't surprise me that this is the next move in that downward spiral to the gutter. So that was our first couple stories we have there. Before we move on, though, I do want to take a moment to invite the listening and viewing audience, if you don't already do so, subscribe to the podcast. You can find audio and video versions of this in all of our podcasts, listed as Insights into Things. We're available on Apple, Spotify, Google, iHeartRadio, TuneIn, and so forth. I would also invite you to reach out, give us some feedback. You can call in, leave a voicemail for us. The number is 856-403-8788. That's 403-8788. Leave us a message. If you want us to get that comment up on the air, we can certainly do so. Just mention it in the message when you leave it. You can also email us at comments@insightsintothings.com. You can find us on Instagram at instagram.com/insightsintothings. We do stream 5 days a week on Twitch at twitch.tv/insightsintothings. Or you can find links to all that and more on our official website at www.insightsintothings.com. And we'll be right back with more technology news.
Insights into Entertainment, a podcast series taking a deeper look into entertainment and media. Our husband and wife team of pop culture fanatics are exploring all things from music and movies to television and fandom. We'll look at the interesting and obscure entertainment news of the week. We'll talk about theme park and pop culture news. We'll give you the latest and greatest on pop culture conventions. We'll give you a deep dive into Disney, Star Wars, and much more. Check out our video episodes at youtube.com/insightsintothings. Our audio episodes at podcast.insightsintoentertainment.com, or check us out on the web at insightsintothings.com.
Welcome back to Insights into Technology. Our next article comes to us from the Associated Press. Russia is behind the Tim Walz disinformation campaign. U.S. intelligence officials have confirmed that groups in Russia were behind a viral disinformation campaign targeting Democratic vice presidential candidate Tim Walz. The campaign spread false accusations about Walz's time as a teacher using manipulated content linked to Russian disinformation operations. This marks the latest effort by Russia to undermine Democratic campaigns and sow discord ahead of the U.S. elections. Federal authorities stopped short of concluding that artificial intelligence was used to create the video, though it showed clear signs of manipulation. Alongside Russia, both China and Iran have also been involved in disinformation efforts, though there's no indication of significant threats to election infrastructure. However, officials assure that improved security measures make foreign interference unlikely to alter the election results. Now, it's tough to avoid political stories this time of year. We're, 2 weeks from an election at this point in time. And this type of news, unfortunately, is not surprising given what we've seen in the last couple of presidential elections. It does signify the growing threat of digital manipulation. I mean, we've seen everything from deep fakes on conference calls to an increase in phishing sophistication with AI injection into that process. And it also shows the next danger of AI and disinformation. And I don't think it comes as a surprise to anybody that AI is a significant tool in disinformation. Anytime you can take existing information, manipulate it in such a way as to make it look convincing and then put it out there for the public, it's a disinformation tool at that point in general. With AI is supercharging that ability with its vast sample size of text to work with, its ability to create natural language responses. It just makes it much easier. Instead of having a hammer to put a nail on the wall, I've got a sledgehammer. You can knock it in one shot. This does also highlight the enterprise vulnerability to disinformation campaigns. This is political in nature, obviously, but this could easily be done in a corporate mentality or corporate world to manipulate stock prices, adjust customer satisfaction levels, or even to put out misinformation about executives that can cause controversial issues that further affect the stock price and performance. Trust is becoming a much more rare commodity now, I think, in information systems. And AI is playing a part in that, unfortunately. There needs to be updates in our defense mechanisms. That's really one of the biggest things that we have to worry about right now is we need real-time defenses. Our real-time defenses that we had before were virus scanning and email scanning and so forth. But you almost need to have an AI defense mechanism in place that's scrubbing everything that comes in. And you can only do that with AI, which is kind of the irony behind the whole thing, is that AI needs to be fighting AI at this point in time. Otherwise, there's no way you're going to establish trust in any of your information systems moving forward. But this does speak to the broader cybersecurity landscape and the challenges that we face now. It's not just about social engineering. It's not just about stopping phishing campaigns or malicious software. It's literally stopping misinformation that is then used to fuel all of those other mechanisms. It's so much easier now with AI to conduct social engineering attacks and convince people that emails and requests and money transfers are more legit now than ever before. And I really think the only way we're going to combat that is with a defensive AI working for us rather than these aggressive AIs working against us. So it's going to, time will tell how well we come out after this. I think I have confidence in our election system still. I think most Americans are smart enough to see through a lot of the propaganda and a lot of the nefarious people that are trying to interfere with the elections at this point in time. At least I hope they do. We'll see in a few weeks. Our next article up is from Engadget. This one talks about AI meeting journalism. OpenAI and Microsoft invest in newsroom innovation. Just when you thought AI couldn't get more scary. OpenAI and Microsoft have announced $10 million in grants to support AI-powered journalism initiatives. The funding will be distributed to news organizations such as Chicago Public Media, the Minnesota Star Tribune, Newsday, the Philadelphia Inquirer, and the Seattle Times. Each outlet will receive an AI fellow for 2 years to explore ways to implement AI technologies and improve business sustainability. This initiative comes as both companies face legal battles from media outlets accusing them of using content for AI modeling training without permission. Despite these tensions, some publications like Condé Nast have reached licensing agreements with OpenAI. OpenAI and Microsoft are each contributing $2.5 million in direct funding and $2.5 million in software credits. The project is being executed in collaboration with the Lenfest Institute of Journalism, with a second round of grants expected for additional publications. So, right, more AI, right? What could possibly go wrong? Well, at least they're trying to use this in a way that's creative at this point. And again, this is not we're not looking at an adversarial type of use here, but one of the concerns that we have right now with AI is, well, obviously plagiarism, but also digital rights management. So you have a lot of AI models out there right now that are sampling everything that's in a public domain, some things that maybe even behind paywalls. And they're drawing on all that to generate what their AI generates. And you've got a lot of creative entities and artists out there who are basically having their work plagiarized and stolen from them. And you've already had numerous stories of news organizations that are artificially creating content using AI. And we've had lawyers that have written case law and defenses based on AI generated legal case information that was pure fiction. And it went unchecked until it faced the scrutiny of a courtroom. So there's a significant push for how to properly use AI and how to fuel AI with content. AI is starved for content constantly, so you're seeing content come in from multiple angles. AI is a tool for innovation. I use it quite frequently. I'll have it reword emails for me to lighten the emails a little bit and make them a little more simplified if I'm communicating with non-technical people. I've used it extensively for research. I've used it for writing policies for some of my cybersecurity policies that had to be written. It's not something that you can just push a button and let it spit out what you need. It takes some effort. It takes, like with any tool, it needs to be used properly and it needs to be used for the right job. Kudos to Microsoft and OpenAI for going down this route and trying to get ahead of the curve, even though to a certain extent the genie's out of that bottle. But I think their focus on balancing innovation and intellectual property rights here, to a large extent, it's kind of covering themselves because they're the ones that are being accused of it right now. And I think to a significant extent, this is really just a redirection to try to get attention away from the negative things. I don't know how serious they are about this. I mean, $2.5 or $5 million drop in a bucket for OpenAI and for Microsoft. So they're clearly not putting themselves in the poorhouse with this effort. I really think this is just another example of the industry trying to self-regulate itself before the government steps in to clear things up. But we'll see. There's a lot that needs to kind of come out of this. This is a multi-year plan that they have here, and I don't doubt that good things will come out of this. But I don't really. OpenAI and Microsoft aren't striking me as being particularly altruistic with this. This is really kind of them trying to police themselves to save any agony they'd run into from the government. I could be wrong, but we'll see in time. Our next story comes to us from The Record. UK report on Cyber Essentials certification. The UK government is celebrating the success of its Cyber Essentials certification scheme, launched a decade ago, despite record levels of cyber attacks in the country. Cybersecurity Minister Ferial Clark highlighted that organizations with Cyber Essentials certifications are 92% less likely to file insurance claims compared to those without it, signaling the scheme's effectiveness. However, uptake remains slow, with fewer than 1% of eligible organizations having obtained certification as of February. Experts like Joseph Janicki from the Royal United Services Institute argue that while the scheme shows promise, its low adoption raises questions about its overall impact and value. To boost adoption, the UK government is pushing for large businesses to require their suppliers to adopt Cyber Essentials, a strategy supported by the country's biggest banks. This initiative may also be reinforced by the upcoming Cybersecurity and Resilience Bill, which aims to update UK cybersecurity laws and protect supply chains. While targeting larger economic players would drive greater adoption, experts warn that more aggressive regulation may be needed to ensure widespread implementation across the economy. Now, this one kind of hits pretty close to home for me because we call it something different, but one of the things that we're doing here in the US is our cybersecurity maturity model, which is based on the NIST 800-171 standards, but it's customized a little bit more than that with its controls. They started out down this voluntary path, I'm going to say back in 2016, 2018, with the DFARS rulings that we had to adhere to. And they were all self-attested, self-audited initiatives that were compliance was required in order to land certain government jobs that required handling of covered unclassified information. The problem you run into there is it was expensive. We paid significant amount of money to get to where we were with it. And we were pretty far along before CMMC came in. So it wasn't inexpensive to get there. And as a result, a lot of the smaller, I don't want to say mom and pop shops, but a lot of the smaller shops out there that are doing subcontracting work for the government couldn't afford to hire a reputable security firm like we did and implement a secure enclave like we did. So a lot of these companies, because it was self-reporting and self-auditing, simply checked the box to get the contracts that they wanted to get and continue to do business, and kind of largely ignored it until CMMC came along and the self-reporting and self-attestation aspect of it became a requirement, and the requirement for third-party auditing was brought into play here. And it started to be incorporated into federal contracts in the United States. And if you weren't compliant or had a path to compliance or showed an honest effort to be compliant or try to get compliant, you simply weren't getting these contracts anymore. The system isn't perfect the way it is now, but I absolutely see them going in that direction in the UK. You are not going to motivate people to take this stuff seriously when it's as expensive as it is, when all they have to do is check a box, or in this case, not even check a box because it's not a requirement. And I think once you put that requirement in there, you're going to start getting some level of compliance. And I guess the model that they're operating under here is primarily a trickle down type of mentality where you need your primes to take it seriously, and they need to flow those requirements down to subcontractors. But you're starting at the top, and you can start at the top because the people at the top are the ones that have the kind of IT budgets that are needed to do these things. You're inevitably going to reach a point as you trickle down, and sometimes not very far from the top, where you just don't have the budgets anymore. Early versions and early talk about CMMC 2.0 talked about having some type of program where you can file for cost reimbursements or, some way to lighten that financial burden. None of that has really come into play at this point in time yet. We haven't realized any of that or seen any of it yet. I don't hold out much hope of that. The federal government is generally not in the market of giving out funding for these mandates that they drop. I don't know. I'm not familiar with the market regulations in the UK as to whether or not they would put out any kind of incentive like that. Typically, it's a carrot and stick approach. The federal government here, it's mostly a stick approach, where if you don't do it, you're going to get punished for it. And I think if the UK takes that tack, they're going to have an uptick in adoption, but you're also going to cause a significant issue for a lot of your existing contractors, and you need to be ready to shake up your contractors at this point in time, and possibly put a lot of companies out of business that depend on those kind of government contracts if they can't adhere to your standards anymore. So there's definitely implications that need to be taken into consideration outside of the immediate cybersecurity concerns. That's it for the news section of this. We're going to take a quick break, and we're going to come back and talk a little bit more technology. We'll be right back.
Are you tired of your favorite gaming podcast finishing with a play?
Oh, no!
Well, check out No Credits Rolled, where we play the games but rarely finish them. How's it going, folks? I'm Sam Whalen, your friendly host at No Credits Rolled, the ultimate gaming podcast, where we dish out the latest scoops and reviews on all your beloved video games.
Hey, listen.
Not only that, but we spice things up with some guest interviews and even give you, yes, you, a chance to have your say. Tune in every other week for a fresh dose of No Credits Rolled, available on all major podcast platforms, and hit us up on social media at No Credits Rolled. So why wait? Let's dive into the gaming world together, where finishing games is optional, but the fun is guaranteed.
Welcome back to Insights into Technology. We've finished up with our tech news of the week. I did want to continue. I had a chance to sit down last week with a good friend of mine, Howard Dortch. Howard is a industry expert. He's worked for Sony Online Entertainment as a developer. He worked for AMD. I know he was instrumental in the Athlon engineering, the Athlon project. He is a respected indie developer. He ended his career in academia, actually, teaching video game development at Shawnee University. And I had a chance to sit down with him. I've known Howard for about 10 years now or so. He's actually a friend from an online gaming community, my Star Wars The Old Republic gaming community. And he and I have known each other for about 10 years now. And he's always an educational and entertaining discussion. So we did part one of our interview last week. We're going to do part two of the interview this week, and we'll see how far we get. We may do a part three. But I give you Howard Dortch and his journey through the technology landscape.
So I got to sit in the research and development labs with when the Athlon first came to be, and I did a whole lot of testing on the processor, like core validation, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, fun times.
Interesting.
It was like a brand new processor. The Athlon was the first computer. I mean, it was a next generation computer, and it was the first computer that could decode 3 simultaneous instructions. In other words, for every clock cycle, it could clock through 3 instructions.
Right.
So you would have a integer instruction, you would have a floating point instruction, and then you would have an SSE instruction. And if you coded it right, 3 instructions at a time, that was like amazing. And, they had to fine tune the microcode to decode the software that was coming in, like what are they doing? They're accessing floating point. So they had certain taglines they had to put on it. And then it went down through the pipes. I got into the actual step-by-step movement of code through a processor. Which again, brain sweat. I mean, it was like it had never been done before. that kind of a processor had never been done before. And the cool thing about it was basically they could run the AMD, the Athlon, at a lower speed and do twice the throughput that an Intel computer could do.
Right.
So yay! Look
So-
what we've done.
So how long were you at AMD at that point?
I spent 2 years, maybe 3 years there.
Okay.
Yeah, well, my job there got to be there was a product that we developed called Code Analyst, and what it did was people would write code for the Athlon processor, and we could take, without running the code, we could take the code and disassemble it and run it through